Hey everybody, Chris here from It's Mean Made, and multicolor 3D printers under $500 have exploded lately, and a lot of them on paper look the same. So in this video, I set out to actually test them. Not just one or two of them, but every multicolor 3D printer I could get under $500. Now, what I found that the spec sheets barely tell the story. Some of these printers gave me gorgeous multicolor prints. Some gave me problems that I have never seen before. And a few of them did things so weird I had to dig through forums just to figure out what was going on. Now, this is not a spec sheet comparison, because you can look up the speeds and temperatures and all of that stuff in seconds. This video is about the actual machines and what it's like to live with them. The things I liked, the things that frustrated me, the things that surprised me, and the little quirks that might drive you nuts if you're brand new to multicolor 3D printing. So here are the printers that I am going to be comparing today. The Flashforge AD5X, the Creality HI with the CFS system, the AnyKobra S1 with the Ace Pro, and the AnyKobra 3 V2 with the Ace Pro. Also, when it comes to the Bambu Lab printers that are in this price point, I'm only going to be talking about them when we're talking about build volume, because I've already done an in-depth video comparing all of the Bambu printers in a separate video. And you can go ahead and check that out in the link down below in the description. So by the end of this video, you will know which one of these multicolor printers under $500 is truly beginner friendly, which one needs a little more patience and tuning, and which one rose to the top after all of my testing. Alright, so let's not waste any more time and let's get into it. So before we get started, I just want to let you know that this is going to take some time. You might have already seen the length of this video. It's a long one, but I cover a lot of really good information. If you're really interested in a multicolor printer, this is going to help you make some decisions of what to choose and probably what not to choose. I wanted to just kind of set the stage. This video is not sponsored by any company in any way. None of these machines were sent to me. I bought every single one of these printers I'm fully reviewing today with my own money, so I can give you my honest, unbiased experience. And one more thing that I always like to say is, you might own some of these printers and have a completely different result and experience than me. You might have gotten better prints or worse prints, and that's normal. Every machine can behave a little differently depending on your setup, your slicer, your filament, and even the environment that you're printing in. What you're about to hear from me are my real experiences, my real results, and my real opinions after putting a lot of hours on each of these machines. So I just wanted to kind of set that stage. And also, you will find the links down below to all of the printers I'm talking about in the video. So let's talk about the only spec that I am going to directly compare, and that is build volume, because that actually matters when you're multicolor printing. So I made a print on each printer to show you how big the build volumes actually are. And one thing I've learned from past videos is just because the manufacturer says the build volume is this, doesn't mean it's true. So let's go over the sizes that the machines actually measured in real life. Alright, so the first one is the Flashforge AD5X. Now, it advertises as 220 by 220 by 220. And the actual build volume is 220 by 220 by 219. So that's pretty much spot on. It's only 1 millimeter short in its height. Alright, so the next one we have is the AnyKobra 3 V2. It advertises as 250 by 250 by 260. The actual print volume was 249 by 249 by 259. So it was mostly right on, except for 1 millimeter off of each dimension. But still, the build volume is quite large for a nice bed slinger. Alright, next we have the AnyKobra S1. Now, it advertises as 250 cubed, so 250 by 250 by 250. And its actual print volume was 249 cubed, so it was just 1 millimeter off each dimension. So it's pretty on target. And now we have the biggest build volume of the group, and that is the Creality HI by 260 by 260 by 300. And the actual print volume was 259 by 259 by 299. So it's really accurate, but only 1 millimeter off as well. And following the biggest one, let's talk about the smallest one, the Bambu A1 Mini. It advertises as 180 cubed, and it prints exactly at 180 cubed, which is really nice. Now when it comes to the Bambu A1 printer, its build volume is 256 by 256 by 256. And just like the A1 Mini, it measures exactly what the manufacturer says. It's 256 by 256 by 256. And here's why it really matters. Because once you add purge towers onto your build plate, that changes your usable build volume, because your space is going to get smaller. So knowing the real numbers of what these things can print can actually help you move forward, making the right selection for your multicolor printer you're wanting to get. Before we move on, I want to just spend a minute and jump up on a soapbox to talk about slicers, because this issue happened over and over with these printers. I don't know why every manufacturer feels the need to make their own slicer. If we're creating something new or genuinely easier to use, fine, that'd be great. But most of them are just reskinning a version of Orca Slicer to a different color scheme or just renaming it. Instead of working with Orca Slicer to add official profiles to the software, they release their own version, which leaves users just juggling multiple slicers. On this computer alone, I have about 10 different slicers, and most of them do the exact same thing. And here is why this really matters. Because all of these printers that I'm talking about showed up in Orca Slicer. I added the profiles and sliced the models, and the prints came out rough or ugly. But when I downloaded each company's reskinned version with their built-in profiles, the prints looked dramatically better. And this issue happened with the Flashforge, it happened with the AnyKobra. And the Creality HI, it actually printed better on the standard Orca Slicer instead of using the Creality print. So that was kind of the opposite. But still, different slicers. So slicer profiles make a bigger difference than people think. And somebody new to 3D printing should know that. Alright, my soapbox is over and I'll step down. So let's get started on the first printer. So first, let's talk about the Flashforge 5X. This machine genuinely surprised me in a lot of good ways. The print quality of this machine was fantastic once I got everything set correctly. The lines are clean, the color transitions looked great, and overall consistency is right up there with some of the best printers in this category. Now, one of my favorite things about this printer is the footprint. This is easily the smallest footprint of any multicolor printer in this entire roundup. Most of the other printers and the AMSs or their material systems sit right next to them and take up a lot of space. Now on the 5X, the spools attach right on the side of the machine. It's extremely space efficient. If you want to, you could fit two 5X machines in the same area of just one of some of these other machines we're talking about in this video. Now the feeding system is also built really well. It feels like the Flashforge really took some inspiration from the AMS Lite on the Bambu printers. When it's feeding and purging, it works smoothly and reliably. And the last thing I think I should mention is when it comes to assembly. This thing was probably the easiest to assemble out of all of the printers we're talking about today. The instructions were easy to follow, and somebody that's never built a 3D printer could probably do this very easily just by following the instructions. It was very user-friendly. Now let's talk about some of the things I didn't like. Now when it comes to the biggest things, it all came down to software. Now, the Flashforge has a really fantastic touchscreen interface for the Adventurer line of 3D printers. I still use mine, and that interface is still one of my favorites for a single color 3D printer. But for some reason, none of that translated to the AD5X. The interface is the exact same. It's not designed for multicolor the way the other printers in this list are. You can't reassign filament slots before you hit print. You can't change the colors easily. Whatever colors are embedded in the G-code, that's the colors you're stuck with. So you have to make sure that those align with your slicer and it aligns on your printer. Now, even though this interface is amazing for the Adventurer line of 3D printers, it's not for this printer. I felt like they needed to do a full overhaul with the interface, not just insert multicolor. This feels like the first generation of multicolor UI, and we're past that. Every multicolor printer in this video lets you adjust things right on the touchscreen before hitting print, but the Flashforge does not. This UI really does need an overhaul, and honestly, I think it could be fixed with just a good firmware update. Then there is the slicer situation. If you're using the standard Orca slicer with the built-in profiles for this printer, your prints are going to look terrible. My very first test on this printer was absolutely shredded. But when I switched to Flashforge's reskinned version of Orca, all of my prints instantly became gorgeous. So if you only own Flashforge machines, that might not be an issue for you. But if you own multiple brands of printers, you now need another slicer installed, which brings me back to my whole soapbox about this whole topic. Now let's talk about another thing, and that is the noise. This is a big downside for me. This is officially the loudest 3D printer that I own. When it does a color change, it scrapes on that back internal purge plate, and it is loud. I mean, so loud that I can hear it a floor above in my house. But I will say, what you pay for in performance, you get back in noise. And yeah. So another thing is the open frame design. This is another limitation. As an XY core printer, the performance is great, but the fact is that you have an open printer, which immediately limits you on different material types. PLA and PETG is fine, but if you want to print anything that requires a stable, warm enclosure, you're going to be fighting drafts. And yes, you technically can get a tent for your printer to solve this, but then you're getting rid of that footprint advantage that this printer really has. And another thing I have to mention is the filament run out handling. Now, I purposely let some spools run out to see how it would handle. And when the filament ran out, the printer paused as expected, but clearing the filament was a pain because it got stuck in those Bowden tubes, and I had to completely disassemble it from the hot end and push filament through to grab it and pull it out. Now, I will say it was a simple fix, but it shouldn't have to require any disassembly to be able to swap out another spool. A better quick release system there would make it a whole lot easier instead of having to actually unscrew that little key. But that's just one thing I felt like I should mention, and it wasn't really a big deal breaker for me, but kind of an annoyance. Now, some of the quirks and weird behaviors that are worth mentioning is, honestly, how crucial using the correct slicer is for this machine. You want to make sure you're using the Flashforge slicer. And most printers, you can get a pretty decent first layer with generic settings, but not this. You have to be using their exact slicer to be able to get some good quality. Luckily, it's pretty much just Orca slicer, and it's pretty easy to use. It also has an unusual sound signature during those color changes. It is loud, and that clunk, clunk, clunk sound of that scraping, I mean, it is reliable, I will say that, but it's not the quietest thing in the world. And another really weird issue that I ran into while slicing, I would put my sliced file G-code on a USB stick and then put it on there to hit print. It would go through the whole auto leveling sequence and then it would just stop. And I had to go back to my computer, reslice the files, and then go back and try to print it again the second time. And then it would work perfectly. Now, this is an issue I found other people complaining about as well. And this honestly could be stemmed from a buggy version of the software, and it could easily be resolved in the future with a future update. And finally, the user interface, it behaves like a single color printer, not a multicolor. And you're just glued into that design. And I feel like it would be a lot better if they just revamped that. So I think it's important to just take a minute and kind of give you the culmination of what the community is saying as well. Because I think it's important, because in this instance, my sentiments line up pretty closely with the entire community of what people are saying. So first, everything people really love about this printer, and I kind of agree with a lot of it. The great print quality once you've dialed it in. It's very accurate build volume. It's a solid, stable frame. People also really like the system of material feeding on the side, so you don't have this extra thing attached. And everybody loves the very small footprint of this printer. Now to get into some of the things that people were consistently complaining about that I found. The first, the outdated and limited multicolor touchscreen interface. Being forced into Flashforge's slicer for the best results, even though it's Orca. The louder than average operation. Also, the open frame limits you to the amount of materials that you can use. And some people think that the filament handling is a little more annoying than it should be, being able to align the proper filament into the right Bowden tube. But overall, the most consistent thing that kept coming up, people were saying that the AD5X feels like an amazing printer that's just being held back by its software, which honestly is a perfect description of how I would say it as well, because it's a solid printer, but that software can hold it back. So when it comes down to it, the AD5X could be a great choice for anyone who primarily prints PLA and PETG, wants excellent print quality after initial setup, values a small footprint, doesn't mind Flashforge's slicer, and doesn't need a fully enclosed system. Now, I don't think this would be a great fit for anyone that wants a polished multicolor touchscreen interface, needs a silent operation, prints performance or specialty filaments, and lastly, this wouldn't be great for somebody that wants a unified slicer for all of their different brands of 3D printers. Alright, so now let's talk about the AnyKobra S1. Now, the AnyKobra S1 has a few genuinely nice touches that I want to highlight. Now, I really do like the build plate system. It locks into place in ways that just feels reminiscent of the Ender 3 series that I really liked, how it just snaps right in. It snaps down securely so you don't have to fight alignment when you're installing it every single time. Now, it does come with a double-sided textured PEI sheet for the build plate. Now, I was genuinely surprised when I saw that it has a very nice charcoal filter that comes with it because of the filtration system that it has. And this is a really good option to have when you're dealing with enclosed 3D printers. And the touchscreen, built-in camera are great additions as well. They're not groundbreaking by any means, but they're practical and they are very helpful. And one little detail that I just thoroughly enjoyed was the little groove at the bottom of the enclosure. It lets you easily sweep out any kind of filament poops or purge debris at the bottom collecting. I know some of these are really tiny features, but these are some of the things that you really start to appreciate once you switch over to a printer that did not have those features. The other thing that's worth mentioning is for the closed XY core machines, this price point is a pretty big perk, especially for those of you that want to print some of those specialty filaments beyond PLA and PETG. So if that's something that you're specifically looking for, this is going to be your best option in all of the comparisons that we're talking about today in this video. And that's also without having to buy some type of extra enclosure or casing to keep a solid temperature. If you need to print things like ABS or ASA, the S1 is probably going to be your best bet. Now, once I use the correct slicer, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but the print quality was actually pretty good. So I printed some snowmen as some test pieces, and they came out with minimal stringing and clean color transitions. So now let's talk about some of the cons, or some of the things that I just noticed that I feel like I should mention to you. Now, this printer was probably the most difficult printer to unbox out of the entire group. The unit is heavy, and the packing was so strong with that suction trying to pull the machine out of the box by myself. It was difficult. So if I had to do it again, I probably would just take my box, set it on the table, and slice open every side of the box instead of lifting it out. So just learn from my mistake on that one. The setup on this also wasn't the easiest. I would probably rate it a 3 out of 5 on the difficulty scale. And the reason was because there was so many tiny screws to remove the Ace Pro AMS and to free the bed. I pulled out several screws that were in so many different awkward positions, and honestly, some of them were really hard to reach. Now, this didn't make it impossible, but it just made the process of assembly a little slower and a little more annoying than the other ones. And unlike most of the printers on this list, this did not come with any snips. So if you need flush cutters and this is your very first 3D printer, you're going to have to buy a pair right out of the gate because they are handy. Now, when we're talking about the build quality of the S1, it's a little different in comparison to the other printers we're talking about. There's just a lot of plastic used throughout this entire enclosure. The doors, the panels, the outer structure. It doesn't feel bad or flimsy, but I guess it's just more of like a budget-friendly feel to it in comparison to some of these other printers that have these like metal, solid, like rigid structures. But one thing I wanted to be clear on, the enclosure, it does seal well. So if you're looking for a printer under $500 that seals well and fully enclosed, this is it. This is your option. It's just something that I want you to be aware of. Like, if you're expecting a heavier, more premium feeling frame, this one leans more towards the lightweight, budget-friendly feel. It's not that it's really poorly made or poorly built. It just feels like it's an affordable type of printer, if that really does make sense. And I wouldn't really consider this a full con, but I just think it's important to just be aware of that. So now let's talk about the AMS Ace Pro. Now, this one caught me off guard because it looks like other AMSs, like the Bambu ones, but it doesn't work the same. Each filament tube runs individually back into the Ace Pro hub, and that is just mounted in the back of the machine. And how it handles that routing is just a little bit different. Now, functionality-wise, it does work, but visually, it just feels bulky, and it's a little more complicated than I feel like it needs to be. I don't know why it doesn't just converge into one Bowden tube earlier on, but that's just me. Now, I was putting a bunch of different types of spools, plastic spools, cardboard spools, to see how it would handle, and I had no problems. It didn't get stuck at all, and it kept feeding really nicely. Now, one thing I will say is it is kind of nice to see just a hole to put the filament through, and it will automatically accept it. All of the other printers out there, you have to like kind of push and then like feed it through and then let go of that release. But for the Ace, you don't have to, which is kind of nice. Now let's talk about slicer issues, because this was easily my biggest problem. With the standard Orca slicer, the prints looked awful. I had prints that showed horrible seam defects. It literally looked like a nozzle clog, except it wasn't. You could see the issue only in certain areas, while the rest of the model printed clean and beautiful. I tried multiple settings, same results. But as soon as I switched to the AnyKobra reskinned Orca slicer, AnyKobra Slice, the prints came out beautiful. The same file, same settings, the only difference was the built-in profiles. The little printed snowman that I made looked great, but the banding on the Captain America helmet, however, did not look great. That was the problem that I was consistently getting. Trying to get a smooth surface was really hard with this printer. I kept getting just mixed results. I also figured out that on larger prints, when I was printing full speed, that's when I started getting some really bad banding issues. But once I switched my slicers, and also once I started slowing down, they started to turn out really nice. Now, the community has some feedback, and it was all over the place. But for the most part, it was lining up for what I was experiencing. Overall, people really like the build volume, they think it gives good quality once you dial it in, and they like the Ace Pro AMS, the enclosure, and they think it's a really solid value for this cost. And I would agree with that. Some of the things that people said they absolutely do not like is the inconsistent print quality across the models, and that's what I was experiencing. Needing the AnyKobra slicer for good results. They also didn't like the amount of plastic being wasted, but we'll get to that in a minute. The bulky tube routing design, which I agree with. And a lot of other people were experiencing the same banding issues on curved surfaces like I was getting. So out of all of the areas that I was looking at what people were saying about these printers, the general consensus is it can print great, but it doesn't always print great. So yeah. So the big question is, who do I think that this printer would be good for? In my opinion, this is good for anybody that wants an enclosure under $500, somebody that does not mind having that cheaper field build, and willing to switch over to AnyKobra slicer. And honestly, this would be a really good printer for somebody that doesn't mind doing a little bit of calibration and dialing in your settings to get beautiful prints. Now, I will say that this 3D printer is not for somebody that wants that premium feel of a 3D printer, or is expecting quality without any tweaking. Somebody who wants simplicity during the unboxing setup. It also might not be the best for somebody looking to only print complex, smooth, curved surfaces in models, because you might experience some of that banding if you don't fine-tune and tweak it. Alright, so real quick, if you have been looking for a place to really learn 3D printing with support from other makers, then you might be interested in the 3D Print Guild. That is what it's all about. Inside, you'll get monthly courses, live calls, we have Q&A sessions where we tackle your questions and challenges together. It's a community built around learning, encouragement, and helping each other improve with every print. So the doors to the guild are closed right now, but they will be opening soon. If you use the link below to join the waitlist, I will notify you the next time the doors open. Alright, so now let's talk about the AnyKobra Cobra 3 V2. Now what I really liked is the excellent print quality once it's dialed in. When this machine is tuned correctly, the Cobra 3 V2 can produce some truly impressive prints. The best example is the back half of this Miles Morales helmet. It's smooth walls, it gives great performance, the clean transitions between colors, and it did give a slight fuzz on some of the multicolor prints, but with a quick pass of a heat gun, it wipes away instantly. So I was able to get this printer to deliver some really high quality results, but only after some setup and troubleshooting, which I'll talk about later. Now, one other thing I will say is the Ace Pro AMS connects to this just like the S1. And I pretty much have the same reservations and the same likes and dislikes that I mentioned earlier. But it does connect, but you do have a lot of those Bowden tubes kind of flowing into it, and you just got to be careful not to kink them. But overall, I noticed that it does feed really nicely, and I had zero issues with it. Now, even though I have some critiques about the overall design, there are a few thoughtful touches. Like, it includes an extra wiper. It includes some extra tools. It also has the option to be able to move the spool holder. Now, the touchscreen is responsive and looks really nice as long as we ignore the typing experience, which I will cover that later. So, while this machine has some quirks, it also has some genuinely helpful features just built right into it. Now, for this bed slinger, in the price point it was, I was pleasantly surprised with some of the results that I was getting. So let's talk about some of the things that I did not like. Assembly on this was probably one of the most complicated of all the printers I put together. Out of all of the multicolor printers in comparison, the AnyKobra S1 V2 had honestly some of the most confusing assembly. I would rate the assembly difficulty on this as probably a 4 out of 5. Not because the instructions were unclear, but because there were just a lot of screws in odd locations, and you really had to pay attention to the instructions because you can easily miss it. There were several fasteners that were really difficult to reach, and the gantry and the tubing routing are designed in a way that feels a little backwards in comparison to the other bed slingers that have multicolor printing. Now, one thing I have to do is call out this touchscreen. It is super frustrating to use the keyboard. It feels like an old cell phone and I'm texting through the numbers. It's super outdated and it's really unnecessary, especially when the A1 Mini has a super small touchscreen in comparison, and it is so easy to type with a QWERTY keyboard on it. So this could be an instant fix, and I feel like that they need to just add this QWERTY keyboard on it instead of like having to select it just like an old cell phone. Yeah. The other thing is the camera mount must be 3D printed. And I'll be honest, this caught me off guard because all of the accessories that came with this was really nice. Except the camera mount. You had to 3D print it and then mount it yourself. All the internals were there, but you had to make it. This isn't a deal breaker, but I just didn't understand why they couldn't just have this included so you could finish the assembly and not have to print something first. Another thing is the spool holder mounts directly on the back of the machine. It's the hardest place to reach on a bed slinger. Now, you can move it, but its default placement is not user-friendly. And also, all of my reservations about the Ace Pro AMS is still the same compared to the S1. But it does feel a little more bulkier because of all of the tubing that has to come all the way over and go into the gantry and move around. Which brings me to my next biggest issue, and that is the footprint. The footprint of this is pretty big. Now, we're not talking about as big as the Creality HI that we'll get into later, but it's pretty big. So I will say, if you're limited on space, this factor alone might completely eliminate this from your choosings, because you have to have it right beside it, unless you have like a desk underneath that you can set it or some shelf above. But the Ace Pro still has to be close to the printer, which takes up real estate. Another thing that I really just did not like about this printer is the build plate design. It's unlike all of the other printers that have like pins or guides to set up. This has a single catch point near the back on the left side by the wiper. So if you don't line it up perfectly, the plate can sit crooked. Compared to the S1, which uses the two simple guided tabs, it makes it consistent every time. I feel like this machine literally took a step backward in that direction. And it also does not have an automatic belt tensioning system. This is a kind of a surprise to me because almost all of these modern bed slingers now have some type of auto tensioning. It does have the old turn knobs to be able to tension it yourself. Not the end of the world, but in this day and age, I feel like you should have that. And when it comes to just general design, the last thing I think is just, it's something that I can see being an issue in the future, is the routing of the Bowden tubes and how much the gantry is moving back and forth and having all of those in there and bending. I honestly, I could see that filament is going to wear down those Bowden tubes over time, and it's going to cause some replacements. Not the end of the world, it's just regular maintenance, but I can see it happening more in this printer than some of the others. So let's talk about some of the results that I was getting. Now, the single color preloaded test file that I had to print for the camera housing, I printed that and it had massive stringing and looked terrible. And this is why I never recommend trusting sampled files. But I will say, it's still printed, just tons of stringing. So once I was using the AnyKobra slicer, the results I was getting was beautiful. The Miles Morales helmet that I printed for myself, I mean, the quality is just outstanding. It's clean, it's smooth, and it was consistent. So the hardware can perform extremely well, but it depends heavily on your slicer profiles. Now, when it came to running out of filament, I purposely let the filament run out mid-print to see a real-world test in behavior. And to my surprise, it handled it beautifully. It paused it, let me change the filament, and then instantly resumed. It handled this a lot better than the AD5X, which required that partial disassembly. However, the final results could vary depending on how long your print sits before you reload the filament. So once I got a really nice looking helmet and seeing the quality of this printer, I was really excited about it. And then I moved on to printing a bunch of little small multicolor parts on there. I decided to pick these little snowmen. And I tell you what, that's where a lot of the disappointment started. With this machine specifically, I got horrible Z-banding on this. A lot worse than the S1 that I was getting. And I thought, okay, maybe there's something wrong with the printer. So I looked it over really well, and I checked all of the loose bolts and all of that to make sure, and I did find 3 or 4 loose bolts here and there, thinking about maybe it's the Z-rods, or it could be something on the bed. I tightened the tension of the bed belts. So after I tightened those few bolts, I thought, yep, that was probably why I was getting this. So I hit print on the file again. And keep in mind, this was the exact same settings as the Miles Morales helmet. And lo and behold, same thing again. Terrible Z-banding. I could not understand it. I printed just one individual part on there, and it printed out just fine. So there's something about printing multiple objects on the bed that just makes me have all of this Z-banding. Maybe I've got a faulty printer, I don't know. But when I'm printing bigger objects, single objects, everything turns out great. But when I print out a bunch of little tiny objects, not so great. And that's where I was really disappointed because I had such high hopes after seeing that Spider-Man helmet. So when I was going over a lot of the feedback in the community, a lot of people were reporting the loose hardware the same as me. Reporting they had loose bolts that they had to tighten, some of the belts were extremely loose and they had to tighten those as well. And this matched exactly what I was experiencing. And a lot of people were experiencing the same thing I was saying, of banding at high speeds. And the quality dropping on multiple printed items, which is just crazy to me, of one thing looks beautiful, 5 things looks terrible. But people were saying that they got better quality once they slowed down all of the accelerations and travels. So the other thing that I found really interesting is, since the Ace Pro was the same as the S1, the community feedback when you're just searching for this printer was completely different. Now, some reported that they were surprised by how great the thing worked. Then other people were complaining of how finicky the filament path can be. And some users actually kept commenting on the worry of the friction path over time because of how long it was. And honestly, that was one of my concerns as well. Now, when it comes to the slicer profiles, they matter a lot. Just like the S1, the community was consistent. Using the AnyKobra branded Orca slicer profiles, you instantly get better results in comparison to just using the default Orca profiles, because you're not going to get the same results. I found a lot of people complaining about, I wish AnyKobra would work harder on their default profiles. And I would kind of agree with that. Alright, so who is this printer good for? I honestly, if you don't want a printer that prints perfect instantly, this is a good one for you. Instead, think of it as a really good printer, but you got to do some wrench turning before you get it there. You're going to have to tune it in, and then you can get amazing results. You need to also understand that the bed slinger sometimes needs checks, like with the belts tensioning and things like that. If you want a larger multicolor printer in this price range, I tell you what, it's a good option because that Spider-Man helmet looks amazing. And with the bigger prints, I don't know how the bigger stuff looks better than the smaller stuff, but it just does. And also, if you're a kind of person that doesn't mind slowing down your printer to get better results, then this could be a printer for you. Because it's not a super fast printer when you're slowing it down to get better results. So if you're somebody that doesn't mind slowing down your printer, tightening some bolts and tensioning some belts, and even experimenting with your accelerations and different profiles, this might be the printer for you because it could reward you with some very beautiful prints. This one, I'm not gonna lie, it was just so confusing because, I mean, I get some of the cleanest prints I've ever seen and then some of the worst prints in the exact same profiles. So I will say, if you're somebody that gets frustrated by debugging issues, if you don't like troubleshooting, if you don't like maintenance on a 3D printer, and you don't have room, like if you have a tight space, this printer might not work for you. Because this is going to require somebody that likes to tinker. But if you do tinker and you're looking for something under 500 bucks, this could be a solid option for you. I'm not gonna lie, I've already said it, but this printer was an enigma to me. It was baffling, like how I can get the most beautiful prints and the worst prints in the same batch. Yeah. Alright, so let's go ahead and move on to the next printer, the Creality HI with the CFS. So some of the things I liked is it's got a solid hardware foundation. The Creality HI is built on that familiar Ender style frame, and it's packaged and layered well, and it was easy to put together, and it doesn't feel cheap in any way. And if you're familiar with building Creality machines, this is going to be very familiar. It was reasonably intuitive. The assembly is fairly straightforward. I would probably rate it a 3 out of 5 on the difficulty scale. A few of the steps felt very vague, but if you scanned the QR codes in the instructions, there was some very helpful follow-along videos, which makes it a little easier. Once you get the main frame together, everything else is pretty much plug and play. There's also some really nice features in the box. You get an extra 0.4 nozzle. You get a nozzle wrench, which is honestly kind of rare to get, but it's a very welcome tool. You got some thermal grease. There's a full little tool kit. Now, some of these are just small touches, but it's really appreciated. Now, one thing I will say, I am getting great print quality now. Once the CFS system was behaving and prints started to look really clean. So let's talk for a minute about what I did not like. The footprint is massive. It is by far the largest footprint out of all of these printers under $500. The HI itself is already a big machine, but once you add that CFS right next to it, it becomes an enormous setup. It's larger than a regular AMS system and takes up some serious desk space. So I will say, if you're concerned with desk space, this might already be out of the running for you. And when it comes to the CFS hub, it mounts by a sticker. So this hub, it attaches on the side with a sticker. No bolts, no mounting brackets. I just feel like, why? Everything else is really thought out and you're really a good construction, and then you just slap something on there with a sticker. I don't get it. Now, it does work. It just feels cheap and temporary for some reason. Not what I would expect from this machine. Now to jump over to the CFS itself. When you're loading filament, you have to give a little more force than you would expect. So I will say, for people that have like hand strength issues, it might be a little bit of a struggle with this system. Now, when it comes to the software and the cloud app, these are the weak points. The hardware feels solid. The software always feels behind and clunky. Now, in my opinion, this has always been a weak point. I have never been a fan of Creality's slicers or their apps and software. But that's my personal thought on it. Some people, I know you guys really like the Creality Slice app, and that's fine, but I got better results out of the Orca Slicer. Now, when we're talking about this printer, this one absolutely gave me the most issues right out of the gate. Now, this is where things started to get really rough. FR2851, filament buffer failure error code. It was a nightmare. Every attempt was an absolute mess. The CFS purged all of the filament, and it went through just fine. It went through the motions and started to print, but no filament was being pushed through the nozzle. It was like once it got through the initial setup, it just stopped. The CFS just did not work. I kept getting that FR2851 retraction issue over and over. I checked for jams. I checked the buffer. I checked the little tension arm. Everything looked fine. What finally fixed it was after talking with several members of my 3D print guild. And the consensus was, just take it all apart, unplug everything, do a little dance, shake your hands and wave them over it, then reconnect everything again from scratch. And honestly, I started doing that, minus the whole dance thing. I know some of them wanted me to, but I didn't. And the weird thing is once I started taking a cable off and putting it back on, it worked. But I noticed I put the cable on the opposite way. So for some unknown reason, when it came down to it, the cabling was the big issue here. And I looked it up online, and a lot of people were experiencing this same issue because of the cables. There can't be any kinks. It has to be a smooth path. And others did say, just swap the cable ends and see if that fixes it. And it baffles me. I have no idea why, but it did. So after all of that, I started getting beautiful prints, and I was very happy with this machine. Now, another thing that I did notice is color bleeding and a lot of angel hair stringing. So I increased the flushing multiplier to help that. And with that more aggressive purging, it did look better. But it did take some careful tuning to reduce the amount of color bleeding on the 3D prints. Now, retraction and travel tweaks I also had to do to reduce some of that angel hair as well. It printed well eventually, but it wasn't a slice once perfectly the first time kind of thing. I had to do some tweaking. Now, another thing I noticed was the prime tower placement. You need to put it in a certain area in the back of your print, or you started getting a lot of that angel hair. I also got some ugly seams, and there were like imperfect starts, a little blob from the travel distance and things like that. They weren't huge issues, but they were some issues that I noticed. The one thing that I just didn't get was, this shouldn't be something users need to worry about or think about. It shouldn't matter where you put your purge tower or anything like that. And honestly, this isn't something I've fully figured out yet either. I've been tweaking different settings and it's getting better, but not fully gone yet. Now, one of the last issues I was really getting that was starting to annoy me is, so the poop would get stuck on that little filament flicker arm, and the filament would just kind of get fused on there. So instead of pausing the print like all of these other printers are doing now when something happens, the Creality HI did something even better. It just canceled. No recovery, no chance to fix, it just simply stopped. So I was in the middle of 2 long prints, and halfway through, it got stuck, fused, and canceled my print. It was beyond infuriating, and I just did not get it. So that was probably one of my biggest upsets when it came to this printer. Now, I haven't figured out a solution for this yet because I've been watching it to see if it's going to happen again. But for the most part, it just seemed like an odd anomaly because I was printing quite a bit. And when I hit that, I don't know what happened. It stuck and that was it. Now, this is really where it gets interesting because when I was looking up feedback of what other people are saying about this printer, I mean, it was a polar split. There is more contention over this printer than all of the others combined. So many people have so many strong opinions, good and bad. Some say this is the best printer once you have it tuned. And some say, like, if you get a good unit, it's genuinely awesome. And even, like, the print quality can be fantastic if everything is behaving, which is a kind of positive con, I don't know. But the negative users are just complaining about all of these firmware bugs, the CFS jams, the filament detection issues not working in any way, and being able to just reseat wires to make it work is a common frustration. And I will say this, I read this comment multiple times of people saying that this printer is hot garbage right out of the box. And I was just like, oh my goodness. Because if I was not an experienced 3D printer and willing to diagnose everything, I can understand why some people open this printer up, put it all together, it doesn't work, and then they take it back and return it. Because a lot of people were complaining about they just couldn't get it to work and they returned it. So, I mean, this is like a give and take. I couldn't believe the range of feedback people were giving. But for the most part, a lot of people were saying that they just don't trust this printer for long prints. And I can understand some of that. But this is the absolute most polarizing printer in the entire lineup under $500. So I guess the big questions is, who is this printer for? And the really big thing is, if you need a really large build volume, this is the biggest in the price point. If you don't mind troubleshooting, if you like tinkering, and you just like messing with a Creality printer, this is your printer for sure, because this is very reminiscent of how I used to deal with my Ender 3s back in the day. It just took a lot of tinkering to get them worked in and fine-tuned perfectly, but once you got it, you got it. And I feel like that's what a lot of people are saying about this printer. And when we get to who this printer is not for, I will say straight out, anybody that wants a plug-and-play multicolor printer, that's not this printer. And if you want a trusted, stable machine, I would say that that's not this printer either. And if you don't want to deal with troubleshooting of firmware or troubleshooting in any way, I wouldn't get this printer. So I will say, if you get a really good unit, everything aligns perfectly for you, you can get some amazing multicolor results with the Creality HI. But all of that being said, this is the one printer out of all of the ones we're talking about that has the highest risk of most user-reported issues across the board. So that is something that you might want to take the user feedback into account. But I gotta say, it has a really good-sized build volume. And as just a quick reminder, if you are interested in the Bambu Lab A1 or A1 Mini, I did a breakdown comparison of all of those printers in a separate video, and I'll have that link down below for you. So now that we've covered all the 3D printers, let's go ahead and talk about the one thing that applies to all of the printers that we talked about today. And this one thing kept coming up no matter which brand I was researching. It was the same pattern. Customer support is the weak spot across the entire 3D printing industry. This isn't unique to AnyKobra, it's not unique to Flashforge, Creality, and I would even say Bambu. I would say what most people are complaining about when it comes to negative reviews online, 9 times out of 10, isn't complaining about the print quality or the features. It's this. Support just takes too long to respond. Responses are too copy and paste with the replies, and they're not reading what the issue is. And then if you need replacement parts, they take weeks and weeks to get. And a lot of users also say they never even hear from them at all. Now, this trend is visible in every single brand represented under the $500 category. This doesn't mean that you'll never get help. This just means that the support quality is inconsistent and often slow. And that is really because these companies are competing by pushing out updates of machines so rapidly. Sometimes the post-purchase support doesn't even get the same level of attention. It's more about selling that next unit instead of what's wrong with the units we just sold. So if you're considering buying one of these machines, it's important to set realistic expectations. The hardware is usually impressive for the price, but if something goes wrong, you may have to be a little more patient than you want to be. So forums, Facebook groups, Reddit posts, all of those sources is usually where people go for help now. And in fact, that's a big part of why communities like my private membership, the 3D Print Guild, have become so valuable. People often get better, clearer, and quicker responses than going through the official channels. Now, don't think that these printers aren't worth buying. They absolutely can be. Their performance to price ratio is honestly incredible these days. But for someone brand new to 3D printing, it's important to know that across customer support in the industry, it's not where it could be. And your experience may depend on the community and resources of your manufacturer. Now, another thing that I wanted to talk about is the reality of filament waste in multicolor printing. Across the board, no matter what category I was looking at, people were complaining about this. Now, I want to talk about this because it applies to every printer in this video. It's the amount of filament waste that comes from multicolor printing. This is one of the most common complaints that I see online, and honestly, it is one of those complaints that's pretty valid. Right now, every 3D printer in this category works pretty much the same way. It's just something that is going to happen. So every machine that we have talked about lets you tune these settings, but none of them can get around the physics of filament contamination. So is there a solution? Not with the typical FDM multicolor technology that we're looking at today. There are some other ones with different tool heads, and we're even looking in the future that is going to swap nozzles, which will be amazing, but that's the future. Right now, this is just something that we have to deal with. Alright, so after spending a lot of hours with these machines, tuning them, testing them, dealing with their quirks, running a lot of multicolor prints, here's where I landed. Out of every printer under the $500 category, the Flashforge AD5X is the one that kind of rose to the top for me. It has the smallest footprint, the material handling system actually works well, and it's really heavy duty. Like, it is a solid build, and it's been very dependable for me. Now, I'm not a fan of the interface in any way on the printer. Like, it just needs an overhaul. I don't like the Flashforge Orca Slicer version that I have to use, but once I did use it, I got some beautiful, consistent, reliable prints. I really wish they would bump up the build volume up just a little bit, like just a bit instead of the 220, because everyone else in the industry is building up their build plates a little bigger than the 220 now. But this printer did not require a lot of calibration and testing. And also, I tell you what, if I'm a beginner just starting out, I feel like this one is the less of the headaches because of how the filament just loads in. I know it's a little annoying when the filament runs out, but it's not the end of the world. So as long as you can get over some of the odd quirks of the Flashforge, I think most people would end up being really happy with this choice. Across the board, all of the printers can really produce some amazing multicolor prints, but they just take tweaking. This one didn't take as much tweaking. I think it does need some firmware updates, but for what it is, it does a good job. But even with that, we are living in an incredible time for budget 3D printers. Just a few years ago, you could not get this level of multicolor capability anywhere near this price. And frankly, I just think that's amazing. And another thing, if you're interested in any of the printers that we've talked about today, I've got links down below to them in the description. They are my affiliate links, and that's just one small way that you can help support the channel. And that's pretty much it. So, as always, I wish you a great day, and I will go ahead and see you in this next video right here.